Betrayal doesn't always arrive with a shouted argument. Sometimes it slips in quietly, wrapped in heavy, gold-embossed cardstock that lacks your name entirely. Sitting inside the Pentagon, staring at a leaked seating chart for the social event of the decade, realization hit. Those who raised me had deliberately erased me. Washington, D.C. operates on a currency of whispers, optics, and old money. In my family, the Pattersons, that currency was hoarded with ruthless precision. We were a legacy family, the kind whose names graced the brass plaques of Georgetown libraries and the donor lists of Kennedy Center galas. To be a Patterson was to exist within a perfectly curated display of wealth and influence. You were expected to attend the right ivy-draped universities, marry into hedge funds or political dynasties, and spend your summers sailing off the coast of Newport. From the very beginning, I was the anomaly in their perfect portrait. While my younger sister Chloe spent her teenage years mastering the art of country club diplomacy and securing her status as the golden child, I was busy breaking every unspoken rule my parents had laid out for me. I didn't want to marry a managing director. I wanted to command a destroyer. When I received my appointment to the United States Naval Academy at Annapolis, my father, Ashton Patterson, looked at my acceptance letter as if someone had handed him a diseased rat. "It's a blue-collar phase," my mother, Beatrice, had told her friends over martinis at the Chevy Chase Club. "She'll get over this militant tomboy nonsense and go to law school like a sensible girl." 25 years later, I had not gotten over it. I had survived grueling deployments in the Persian Gulf, commanded a carrier strike group in the South China Sea, and spent sleepless weeks in classified bunkers, coordinating naval intelligence. I traded pearls for dog tags and silk gowns for the heavy, structured fabric of Navy service dress whites. My career was a point of deep, unspoken shame for my parents. To them, the military was something other people did, people who didn't have trust funds. They viewed my uniform not as a symbol of service or leadership, but as a tacky costume that fundamentally clashed with their aesthetic. The disconnect had always been there, simmering beneath polite holiday dinners, but it finally boiled over during the lead-up to Chloe's wedding. Chloe was marrying William Prescott IV, the heir to Prescott Aerospace, one of the largest defense contractors in the nation. It was a merger of two D.C. dynasties, a wedding designed to be splashed across the pages of Town and Country and whispered about in the halls of the Capitol. For 6 months, my mother had been in a state of manic event planning, obsessing over imported hydrangeas and custom champagne flutes. I had given them space, buried under the crushing weight of my own duties at the Pentagon, assuming my invitation was simply delayed in the labyrinth of the military mail system. Then, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, my phone buzzed on my desk in the E-ring of the Pentagon. It was a text from my cousin Amelia, accompanied by a high-resolution photo of a massive, ornately calligraphy-covered seating chart. "Hey, Soph," the message read. "Are you sitting at one of the overflow tables? I've looked at this board 3 times and I can't find your name anywhere. Just want to make sure we get a chance to grab a drink." I zoomed in on the image. The tables were named after European cities. Table Paris, Table Milan, Table Vienna. I scanned every single name. Prescott, Patterson, DuPont, Astor. Nothing. A cold, heavy stone dropped in my stomach. I was a combat veteran. I had stared down foreign adversaries and navigated international crises without blinking. But in that moment, sitting in a secure facility in Virginia, the sting of being utterly discarded by my own flesh and blood stole the breath from my lungs. I picked up my phone and dialed my mother's number. She answered on the 4th ring, her voice breathless and annoyed. "Sophia, darling, I am in the middle of a cake tasting with the pastry chef from the Waldorf Astoria. Can this wait?" "I just saw the seating chart for Saturday, Mother," I said, keeping my voice dangerously level, a tone that sent junior officers scrambling on the bridge of my ships. "My name isn't on it." There was a pause on the line, followed by a heavy, theatrical sigh. "Oh, honestly, I told your father we should have just sent you an email, but you're always deployed or underwater or wherever it is you go, and we simply couldn't wait." "An email to tell me I'm not invited to my only sister's wedding?" "Sophia, try to look at this logically," Beatrice said, her tone dripping with that familiar, patronizing warmth she reserved for unruly children. This isn't just a wedding, it's an incredibly delicate networking event. The Prescotts are bringing in senators, CEOs, and foreign dignitaries. It's a very specific aesthetic. Black tie, high glamour. We simply couldn't risk you showing up in those stiff, awkward uniforms looking like a security guard. It would throw off the entire visual harmony of the photos. I close my eyes, my knuckles turning white around my phone. You're embarrassed of me. You're cutting me out of Chloe's wedding because you don't like my uniform. Don't be dramatic, Sophia. You've never fit into this world. You always look so uncomfortable, and frankly, you make the other guests uncomfortable with your intense little war stories. Chloe deserves a perfect day without the awkwardness of explaining why her sister is dressed like a cruise ship captain. We'll send you a lovely slice of cake. I have to go. The line went dead. I sat in the silence of my office for a long time. The rejection was absolute. They had entirely erased me from the family narrative. I wasn't just a black sheep anymore. I was a ghost. Slowly, I placed the phone face down on my desk. I didn't cry. The Navy had trained the tears out of me decades ago. Instead, a quiet, terrifying resolve settled into my bones. They wanted a perfect day without the military intruding on their high society fantasies. But Washington, D.C. has a funny way of making reality crash through closed doors. And reality was about to hit the Patterson family like a tidal wave. Saturday arrived with the crisp, golden light of early autumn. The wedding was being held at the Waldorf Astoria in downtown Washington, a towering monument to luxury and excess. While my mother was likely having a meltdown over the floral arrangements in the grand ballroom, I was standing at attention in the deepest, most secure corridors of the Pentagon. It was a monumental morning for me, one that my family knew absolutely nothing about. At 0800 hours, in a quiet, heavily guarded ceremony, the Secretary of Defense had pinned a 4th star to my collar. At 43, I had just become one of the youngest full admirals in the history of the United States Navy, tapped to take over a critical, newly formed Global Strike Command. It was the culmination of a lifetime of sacrifice, broken relationships, and near-death experiences. The brass on my shoulders was heavy, the rows of ribbons on my chest, including the Defense Distinguished Service Medal, gleaming against the pristine white fabric of my service dress uniform. As I walked out of the briefing room, straightening my cover, a booming voice echoed down the hall. "Admiral Patterson!" I turned and snapped a crisp salute. Striding toward me was General Terrence White, a legend in the Marine Corps and the current chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He was a mountain of a man, carrying the weight of the nation's military on his broad shoulders. "At ease, Sophia," General White smiled, returning the salute before extending a massive hand. "Congratulations again, long overdue, but don't get entirely too comfortable in that office. We have an off-site deployment this evening." I frowned, mentally reviewing my schedule. "Sir?" I wasn't briefed on an off-site. White's eyes twinkled with a knowing, dangerous amusement. "William Prescott Sr. has been hounding me for 3 months to attend his son's wedding tonight. Prescott Aerospace is about to sign a massive contract with the DoD to supply our new drone fleet. I'm attending the reception, and I need my newly minted 4-star commander by my side to remind those corporate suits who holds the leash." My stomach tightened. "With respect, General, the groom is my future brother-in-law. It's my sister's wedding." White raised an eyebrow. "Even better. You know the players. I expect to see you at the Waldorf at 1800 hours, Admiral." "Sir, there's a complication," I said quietly, the humiliation burning the back of my neck. "I am not on the guest list. My family. We have a complicated dynamic. They did not invite me." General White stopped walking. He looked at me, a man who had commanded divisions in Fallujah, processing the sheer absurdity of the statement. He looked at my chest, heavy with medals earned in the blood and mud of global conflict, and then at my 4 stars. A slow, terrifying grin spread across his weathered face. "You weren't invited?" White chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. "Sophia, you command the greatest naval fleet on the planet. I have 4 stars, you have 4 stars. We are the United States Armed Forces. We don't need an invitation to a contractor's party. You put on your dress whites, you shine those medals, and you meet me at the front door. That's a direct order." "Yes, sir," I replied, a spark of fierce anticipation suddenly igniting in my chest. At exactly 1,800 hours, I stepped out of a black government SUV in front of the Waldorf Astoria. The entrance was a chaotic symphony of wealth. Valets were rushing to park Ferraris and armored Maybachs. Women in $1,000 silk gowns and men in bespoke Tom Ford tuxedos flowed through the grand arches. The paparazzi were cordoned off behind velvet ropes, snapping photos of DC elite. I walked up the red carpet, and the atmosphere instantly shifted. The pristine, blinding white of my uniform stood out like a lighthouse against a sea of black and pastels. Conversations halted. Heads turned. The wealthy elite might not understand military rank structures, but they understood power. They saw the heavy gold braid on my shoulders, the intricate rows of ribbons, and the quiet, lethal confidence of my stride. The crowd naturally parted for me as I entered the opulent lobby, moving toward the grand ballroom where the cocktail hour was already in full swing. Standing near the entrance, greeting a pair of senators with fake, polished smiles, were my parents. My mother looked stunning in an emerald Carolina Herrera gown, dripping in diamonds. My father stood beside her, holding a crystal tumbler of scotch. As I approached, my mother turned her head. The smile froze on her face. Her eyes widened, tracking the white uniform, the medals, the cover under my arm. All the color drained from her cheeks, as if she had just seen an apparition. Ashton followed her gaze, his jaw locked, his knuckles turning white around his scotch glass. I stopped 3 feet away from them, standing at parade rest. The silence between us was deafening, even over the string quartet playing in the background. "Hello, Mother." "Father," I said, my voice projecting with the calm, terrifying authority of a ship's captain. Before Ashton could speak, Beatrice stepped forward, her face twisted in a mixture of horror and fury. She hissed, keeping her voice low to avoid a public scene, but the venom was palpable. "Sophia, what in God's name are you doing here?" Beatrice demanded, her eyes darting around to see if anyone was watching. "I told you explicitly that there was no space for you, and you show up in that ridiculous costume?" "It's not a costume, Mother," I replied evenly. "It's the uniform of the United States Navy." Ashton stepped into my path, using his body to physically block my view of the ballroom. His voice was cold, vibrating with rage. "You are intentionally trying to ruin your sister's wedding out of sheer jealousy. You think marching in here in your little sailor suit is going to guilt us? You are embarrassing yourself, Sophia. Leave. Now. Before I have the hotel security, remove you." I didn't flinch. I didn't break eye contact. I looked at the man who had dismissed my entire life's work, entirely ignorant of the fact that the hotel security he was threatening me with was currently being managed by the Secret Service, who answered directly to the DoD apparatus I helped command. "I suggest you lower your voice, Father," I said softly. "Don't you dare give me orders," Ashton snapped, taking a threatening step forward. "You are not on the guest list. You are a trespasser at a private event. If you have a shred of respect for this family, you will turn around and walk out those doors." "Is there a problem here, Ashton?" The voice boomed through the lobby like a thunderclap. My parents froze. Approaching from my left, flanked by a phalanx of aides and plainclothes security, was General Terrence White. His chest was covered in so much brass and ribbon it practically blinded the ambient light. The crowd of wealthy elites had fallen completely silent, parting for the chairman of the Joint Chiefs like the Red Sea. Ashton's face instantly transformed. The anger melted away, replaced by a sycophantic, desperate grin. He quickly bypassed me, extending his hand toward the general. "General White, what an absolute honor, sir. No problem at all. Just dealing with an uninvited interloper. Please, let me escort you inside to the VIP tables." General White ignored Ashton's outstretched hand. He didn't even look at him. Instead, the most powerful military commander in the free world stopped squarely in front of me, braced his massive frame, and snapped a textbook-perfect salute. "Welcome, Admiral Sophia," White said, his voice echoing off the marble walls, ready to show these civilians how the Navy operates. Shockwaves rippled through the immediate circle of onlookers, visible in the widened eyes and parted lips of the surrounding politicians and socialites. General White's crisp salute hung in the air for a fraction of a second before I returned it with equal precision. Beside me, Ashton remained frozen, his outstretched hand suspended awkwardly in the space between us. Beatrice looked as though she had been physically struck. Her gaze darted frantically from the general's imposing figure to the 4 gleaming stars newly affixed to my collar. In her world of country clubs and charity galas, military ranks meant little, but the absolute deference shown by a man who regularly briefed the President of the United States was a language she understood perfectly. Slowly, White turned his massive frame toward my father. The warmth vanished from his eyes, replaced by the frigid, calculating stare of a combat commander assessing a minor threat. "Ashton Patterson, I presume," White said, his voice entirely devoid of the sycophantic warmth my father was accustomed to receiving. "You were just threatening to have my newest operational commander thrown out of a hotel by security? A fascinating tactical choice, considering Admiral Patterson here is now the highest-ranking naval officer on the eastern seaboard." Ashton sputtered, his face flushing a deep, mottled crimson. "General, there has been a massive misunderstanding. Sophia is my daughter, yes, but she isn't on the guest list. We had no idea she was—" "You had no idea she was being promoted to a 4-star billet this morning at the Pentagon?" White interrupted, his tone laced with heavy sarcasm. "Clearly, because if you had an ounce of strategic sense, she would be sitting at the head table. Instead, you tried to treat an American war hero like a wedding crasher." Footsteps echoed sharply against the marble floor before Ashton could formulate a defense. Striding aggressively through the crowd was William Prescott Sr., the billionaire defense contractor and father of the groom. Prescott was a man used to dictating terms to entire nations. He moved with the frantic energy of a corporate shark who had just spotted blood in the water. "General White!" Prescott boomed, completely oblivious to the radioactive tension radiating from my parents. "We are so deeply honored you could make it. The board has been incredibly anxious to discuss the final integration timeline for the drone contract. Please, let me show you to your table." White didn't move. He gestured toward me with a slight nod of his head. "Prescott, I believe introductions are in order. You know Ashton and Beatrice, obviously, but I don't believe you've formally met the woman who holds the fate of your aerospace company in her hands." Prescott Sr. stopped short, his eyes finally landing on my white uniform. He was a defense contractor. Unlike my parents, he knew exactly what the insignia on my shoulders meant. His eyes tracked the 4 stars, the command pin, and the rows of combat decorations, the color visibly drained from his aristocratic face. "Allow me to introduce Admiral Sophia Patterson," White continued, his voice echoing loudly enough for the surrounding senators and dignitaries to hear every word. "Confirmed by the Senate, pinned this morning, and officially commanding the DoD's new Global Strike Command. Effectively immediately, Admiral Patterson has complete operational oversight and final sign-off authority on all defense contracts pertaining to unmanned aerial systems, including yours, William." Absolute, terrifying silence descended upon the foyer. Prescott Sr. looked like a man who had just swallowed glass. His company's stock valuation, his family's legacy, and the billion-dollar DoD contract were entirely dependent on the approval of the woman his new in-laws had just tried to banish to the street. He turned slowly to look at Ashton and Beatrice, his expression transforming from polite host to ruthless businessman. "Ashton," Prescott said, his voice dropping an octave, shaking with suppressed panic. "Did I just hear you attempting to throw the commander of Global Strike out of my son's wedding?" My father opened his mouth, stammering incoherently. "William, you have to understand. Sophia, the aesthetics of the event. Beatrice and I simply thought—" "You thought?" Prescott hissed, stepping dangerously close to my father. "You arrogant fool, we spent 3 years lobbying for this contract. My entire engineering division is riding on this integration, and you were trying to have the absolute authority on the project escorted out by hotel bouncers because you didn't like her uniform?" Beatrice shrank back, grasping Ashton's arm. The meticulously crafted illusion of their perfect high society dominance was shattering into a million jagged pieces on the marble floor of the Waldorf Astoria. They were no longer the powerful Patterson patriarch and matriarch. They were liabilities, actively jeopardizing a multi-billion-dollar empire. Prescott Sr. immediately pivoted back to me, his posture entirely subservient. Admiral Patterson, I cannot apologize enough for this appalling display of disrespect. Had I known, had anyone informed me of your promotion or your attendance, you would have been our guest of honor. Please, allow me to personally escort you to the VIP suite. We have vintage Dom Perignon waiting. I looked at the billionaire contractor, then at my parents, who were now staring at me with a sickening mixture of terror and desperate calculation. Decades of snide remarks, exclusion, and dismissive insults culminated in this single, crystalline moment. They had built their entire lives around the pursuit of power, completely oblivious to the fact that I had quietly accumulated more authentic power than their country club circles could ever comprehend. "Thank you, Mr. Prescott," I replied, my voice steady, professional, and devoid of the emotional chaos swirling around us. "But I am not here for champagne." Walking past my paralyzed parents, I moved directly into the grand ballroom, flanked by General White and a frantically accommodating Prescott Sr. The room was a masterpiece of extravagant wealth, towering centerpieces of white orchids, crystal chandeliers casting a warm glow over hundreds of DC elites, and a 10-piece orchestra playing softly in the corner. As the three of us entered, the orchestra abruptly halted. Word of the confrontation in the lobby had clearly spread through the room like wildfire. Hundreds of pairs of eyes locked onto the blinding white of my uniform. Across the room, standing on a raised dais near the multi-tiered wedding cake, was my sister. Chloe looked immaculate in a custom Oscar de la Renta gown, holding a glass of champagne next to her new husband, William IV. When she spotted me, her smile collapsed. She whispered frantically to William, who looked equally bewildered. Prescott Sr. marched directly toward the dais, gesturing for us to follow. The crowd parted silently, watching the spectacle unfold. My parents trailed behind us at a safe distance, looking like hostages being marched to the gallows. Reaching the dais, Prescott Sr. bypassed his son and daughter-in-law, turning to face the bewildered crowd. He grabbed a microphone from the nearby bandstand. "Ladies and gentlemen," Prescott announced, his voice echoing through the massive sound system. "There has been an egregious oversight this evening. We are profoundly honored to be joined by a true American hero. Please join me in congratulating the newly appointed commander of Global Strike, 4-star Admiral Sophia Patterson." Hesitant applause rippled through the room, quickly building into a standing ovation as the political heavyweights in the crowd recognized the magnitude of the title. Senators clapped. Defense lobbyists practically fell over themselves trying to look enthusiastic. Chloe stood frozen, her knuckles white around her champagne flute. She stared at the stars on my shoulders, her perfectly contoured face contorting with a mix of furious jealousy and deep confusion. This was supposed to be her coronation into DC royalty. But the spotlight had just been violently hijacked by the sister she had deliberately hidden away in the shadows. "Sophia," Chloe hissed under her breath as I stepped onto the dais, maintaining her fake smile for the cameras snapping away in the background. "What are you doing? You are ruining my wedding. You're intentionally trying to upstage me." Looking down at my younger sister, the anger that had been simmering in my chest for 25 years suddenly evaporated. It was replaced by a profound, hollow pity. Chloe was trapped in a gilded cage, entirely dependent on the approval of men like Prescott Sr. and our father. She measured her worth in floral arrangements and seating charts, oblivious to the vast, terrifying, and beautiful reality of the world outside her bubble. "I'm not here to upstage you, Chloe," I said softly, ensuring only she and her husband could hear. "I am here on official Department of Defense business. Your new father-in-law invited my superior officer to discuss a contract that my command oversees." William IV swallowed hard, suddenly grasping the sheer gravity of the situation. "Sophia, Admiral, we didn't know." "You didn't want to know," I corrected him gently. I turned my attention back to my sister. "You wanted a perfect day, Chloe. You wanted a room full of powerful people to validate your existence. Well, you have them. Enjoy the party. Turning away from the bride and groom, I faced William Prescott Sr. He stood at attention, waiting for my judgment, fully aware that I had the authority to redline his drone contract before the morning sun hit the Potomac. "Mr. Prescott," I said, projecting my voice so the surrounding guests, including my parents, could hear clearly. "The Navy operates on principles of honor, integrity, and absolute reliability. When we evaluate a defense contractor, we look closely at the culture of their leadership. We look at how they treat people when they think no one important is watching." Prescott Sr. paled, sweat beading on his forehead. "Your engineering division submitted a compelling proposal for the drone fleet," I continued, my tone strictly professional. "I will review the technical specifications with my team at 0600 hours on Monday. If the mathematics hold up, we will proceed with the contract. Not because of this party, not because of the champagne, and certainly not because of any familial connection. We will proceed because it is what is best for the United States Armed Forces. Do we understand each other?" "Perfectly, Admiral," Prescott breathed out, a wave of visible relief washing over him. "Absolutely perfectly." General White stepped up beside me, a look of immense pride etched into his weathered features. He placed a heavy hand on my shoulder. "Spoken like a true fleet commander. I believe our work here is done, Admiral." "Yes, sir," I replied. Without another word, I turned on my heel. I didn't look back at Chloe, who was now quietly weeping into her husband's shoulder. I didn't look at Ashton, who was staring at the floor in absolute defeat, or Beatrice, who was desperately trying to avoid the judgmental glares of her wealthy friends. They had spent their entire lives cultivating an illusion of supremacy, and it had taken exactly 15 minutes of authentic, earned authority to reduce it to ash. Walking back down the center aisle of the ballroom, the crowd parted for me once more. The whispers had stopped. There were no more patronizing stares or confused glances. There was only absolute respect. Stepping out of the Waldorf Astoria and into the cool, crisp Washington air, I took a deep breath. The heavy gold braid on my shoulders caught the light of the street lamps. I had spent my entire life trying to figure out how to fit into the Patterson family portrait, only to realize I was never meant to be confined by their frame. I belonged to the ocean, to the fleet, and to the immense responsibility I had sworn an oath to uphold. Reaching the waiting government SUV, I opened the door and slid into the quiet, leather-scented interior. The driver, a young petty officer, glanced at me through the rearview mirror. "Where to, Admiral?" he asked. "Back to the Pentagon," I said, resting my cover on the seat beside me. "We have work to do." Stories of resilience and reclaiming your power are unfolding around us every single day. If Admiral Sophia's journey from a discarded daughter to a commanding force inspired you, make sure to hit that like button and share this video with someone who needs a reminder of their own strength. Don't forget to subscribe and click the bell icon so you never miss out on our weekly dramatic storytelling. Drop a comment below. How would you have handled this family betrayal?